Hello, my name is Hallie, and welcome to this assessment of the other senses. In this review, we're going to explore the senses outside of vision and hearing because these senses aren't tested to the same level of detail that vision and hearing will be, but they are still topics that you may encounter on test day. And by completing this review, we'll have a better ability to describe the senses that are outside of our vision and hearing, such as smell and touch. And we'll be able to attack questions such as the one at the bottom of the screen, which asks us to recall which of our senses require receptors. Let's begin with our sense of smell. And smell is mediated through the use of olfactory chemoreceptors. And these are receptors that are able to bind molecules that have been aerosolized into the air that we breathe. And there are a large number of chemoreceptors, but they're not all the same. We have a huge variety in these receptors, which is a great asset because this allows us to differentiate between different types of smells, such as being able to differentiate between food or a dangerous chemical. And we actually have a pretty good sensitivity where we can differentiate between two smells that are very similar, such as two types of flowers like lavender and jasmine. The olfactory chemoreceptors line the olfactory epithelium, and once they're able to bind a molecule in the air, they will initiate a signal that will travel down the epithelium and reach the olfactory bulb. Once that signal reaches the olfactory bulb, it can be transmitted to the higher regions of the brain. I'm sure many of us have heard of pheromones before, and pheromones are chemicals that are released by an animal that carry endocrine information. And these also bind olfactory chemoreceptors, and the animal receiving the pheromone will have some influence on their behavior. For example, it's been shown in the animal kingdom that pheromones play a significant role in different types of behaviors, such as mating or foraging for food. However, it's unclear if humans are really able to detect pheromones. So to summarize the smell pathway, we have molecules that enter into our nasal cavity through the air that we breathe that bind chemoreceptors on our olfactory epithelium. This will start a nerve signal that will be sent to the olfactory bulb, and this bulb will then relay that information to the higher regions of the brain. One important thing to remember for the MCAT is that our sense of smell is the only sense that will not be filtered through the thalamus. It can go directly to the higher regions of the brain. Our ability to taste is also mediated through the use of chemoreceptors, which lie in our taste buds on our tongue, specifically in the papilla. As we chew our food, molecules will be able to interact with the chemoreceptors in our taste buds and initiate our ability to taste. And we are able to differentiate between a few different types of taste. For example, sourness. Sourness is actually determined by the acidity of our food, while saltiness is determined by the presence of alkali metals, such as the sodium in table salt. We're also able to detect umami, which is another word for savoriness, sweetness, and bitterness. Now, while sourness and saltiness are determined by the acidity and presence of alkali metals in our food, umami, sweetness, and bitterness are determined by specific molecules. To summarize the pathway of taste, molecules will bind chemoreceptors on the taste bud of our tongue. The information will be sent to the brainstem, where it can be filtered by the thalamus and then relayed to the appropriate regions of the brain. Let's now define the senses that are not mediated through the use of receptors. Somatosensation is our ability to collect sensory information from our peripheral nervous system. Many of us refer to this as our sense of touch. But for the purposes of the MCAT, somatosensation will be the preferred term because there are 4 different types of touch sensations: pressure, vibration, temperature, and nociception, which is our ability to detect pain. There are 2 interesting characteristics of somatosensation that we'll want to know for test day. The first being the 2-point threshold. If you've ever taken 2 pins, for example, and put them right next to each other on your skin, you may not have noticed that there were actually 2 objects touching your skin. If you take those 2 pins and separate them by some distance, and you are able to determine that there are actually 2 objects touching your skin, then you've crossed the 2-point threshold. There's also physiological zero, which has to do with our ability to detect the temperature of the objects around us. Now, our skin is at our body temperature. So when we touch an object and we determine that it's hot, that means that that object is hotter than our body temperature, and if it's cold, then that object is colder than our body temperature. So we zero out our temperature scale, if you will, right around our physiological range. We'll also want to be able to identify kinesthetic sense on the MCAT, and this is our ability to identify where our limbs are oriented around our body and to coordinate with our muscles and joints in order to perform a specific task. This is also known as our proprioception. So let's evaluate a complex task, like Mr. Jones here, who's going to catch a football and try to run and gain some yards. What type of sensations or processes is Mr. Jones performing in order to successfully catch the football? He'll certainly use kinesthetic sense in order to understand where his feet and arms are in relation to the rest of his body. He'll use his vestibular sense in the inner ear to maintain his balance and detect acceleration. His somatosensation will help him know that the ball has entered into his hands, and if he is tackled, he'll need nociception to detect pain and determine if he was injured or if he was tackled safely. Let's try some practice questions, shall we? This question is asking us to recall which of our senses require a receptor. And the correct answer is D. Only taste and smell are dependent on the presence of chemoreceptors. And remember that the vestibular sense is located in the inner ear and is used to detect balance through the use of fluid-filled canals. We can also evaluate questions which present us with the patient and identify the underlying cause of her symptoms. And the correct answer is C, her kinesthetic sense. She didn't complain about any problems with smell or with pain, so A and D could be eliminated. And we know it couldn't be a problem with her vestibular sense because she was able to maintain her balance while her eyes were closed. She just seems to have an issue with understanding where her limbs are oriented around her body, which is dependent on her kinesthetic sense. And to highlight, the key takeaways for test day is that our sense of smell is detected by chemoreceptors in our nasal cavity, and that this stimuli can be relayed to the brain for processing without being filtered through the thalamus. While our sense of taste is detected by chemoreceptors in the tongue, and this will pass through the thalamus. Our somatosensation is our ability to sense touch as well as pain, while kinesthetic sense is our ability to coordinate our limbs around our body and detect where they are. Well, congratulations on completing this review of the other senses. Maybe the next time you do a highly coordinated physical task, you'll be thinking about how you're using your kinesthetic sense to prevent yourself from falling on your face. Thank you for joining me, and as always, best of luck on your MCAT.